So what if we completely flip the script on how we do research? What if we stop treating communities like they're just subjects under a microscope and instead treated them like the experts they are in their own lives? Well, today we're digging into a pretty revolutionary idea in research, one that's all about handing power back to the people.
It really all boils down to a single, tiny word. For ages, research was done on a community. You'd have outside experts come in, collect their data, and then they'd leave. But what happens if we just change that one little word to with? Well, everything changes. The whole dynamic shifts. People are no longer just data points, they're partners, and they're sharing their own deep local knowledge.
And to really get just how big of a deal this new approach is, we have to take a quick look at the old way of doing things. A system where communities were, let's be honest, often treated more like resources to be mined than partners to be respected.
The perfect term for this is extractive research, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Researchers would parachute in, extract this valuable information, this data, and then take off. The people in the community, they had almost no say in how it was done, and they almost never got to see the results of a study that was all about them.
Honestly, this old system was just fundamentally broken. Just imagine it. You're spending a ton of money and time on these huge surveys, and what do you get? Mountains of data that are so overwhelming you can't even manage them. And the worst part? The local people, the ones whose lives you're supposedly trying to improve, they were barely part of the conversation. Sure, they were consulted, but they weren't empowered to actually define their own problems or come up with solutions. The power always stayed with the outsiders.
But, a system that flawed can't last forever. By the late 1970s, the cracks were really starting to show. You had all these researchers and development workers on the ground who were getting super frustrated. They could see it wasn't working, and they just knew there had to be a better way. And that frustration, well, it sparked a revolution.
And this revolution didn't happen overnight. It came in waves. It started in the late 70s with something called rapid rural appraisal, which was all about being faster than the old clunky surveys. But people quickly realized that speed wasn't the main point. The real magic was getting the community involved. So it evolved into participatory rural appraisal, or PRA. And today, we often use an even broader term, participatory learning and action, or PLA, which really captures the whole collaborative spirit.
At the heart of this entire movement is this one brilliant metaphor from a guy named Robert Chambers, one of its pioneers, handing over the stick. It's such a simple image, but it's so powerful. Think about it. The stick represents control, knowledge, the power to lead. This new approach is about the researcher literally handing that stick over to the community and saying, you lead, you draw, you show us your world.
So, okay, that's the big idea. But what does handing over the stick actually look like in the real world? Let's zoom in on Participatory Rural Appraisal, PRA, because it's a fantastic example of what research with people is all about.
This stuff just turns traditional research completely upside down. It's built on a few core beliefs. First, that every single person, no matter their level of education, can analyze their own situation. Second, the researcher isn't the big expert anymore. They're on equal footing with the participants. The methods are super flexible and creative, and, this might be my favorite part, the whole process should actually be enjoyable for everyone.
But what does this really look like on the ground? Okay, to bring us to life, I've got a perfect story for you. It comes from a maternal health project in a village in Lombok, Indonesia, and it just perfectly shows the difference between knowing about a place and truly understanding it.
So the story kicks off with a highly trained government midwife. She's an outsider, sent in from Java. She's asked to draw a map of the village, marking all the homes with infants and pregnant women. And she does it, very confidently, using all her official records and her professional expertise. She thinks she's got it all covered. But then, and this is the key moment, the researchers handed over the stick. In this case, it was a pen. They turned to the local women in the village and said, okay, now it's your turn. You draw the map of your community.
And when they put those two maps side by side, wow, the difference was just unbelievable. The official midwife's map, the expert map, was full of holes. It was shockingly incomplete. But the map the women from the community drew, it was packed with detail. It showed so many more infants and pregnant women that the formal health system had absolutely no idea even existed.
So what was going on here? How could the expert be so wrong? Well, the local women could tell you exactly why. There were cultural issues with the outsider midwife. A lot of women preferred their own traditional birth attendant. For others, it was simple. They had no way to get to the clinic. And some were just plain scared of the formal medical system.
These were all the invisible barriers, the real-life stuff that a survey on a clipboard could never, ever uncover.
And what's so cool is that this mapping exercise, that's just one single tool in what is basically a whole toolkit of participatory methods. PRA is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, there's this whole family of methods. You've got different tools for different jobs, right? So some, like PRA, are great for gathering really rich information. Others, like one called SARR, are specifically designed to help communities build confidence and plan their own projects. And then you have others, like beneficiary assessment, that are all about getting blunt, honest feedback on how a project is actually going. They all have different names, but they share one single goal: empowerment.
And all of this is driving towards one big thing, what the experts call interactive participation. But let's just ignore the jargon for a second. What it really means is that moment when a community stops just being asked for their opinion and starts leading the charge. They're the ones doing the analysis, they're the ones making the plans, and they are the ones making the final decisions about their own future. That, right there, is what true empowerment looks like.
All right, so let's bring this all home. Why does this work so well? What is the real, tangible impact of actually handing over that stick?
The power here is just immense. For one, it gets you access to vulnerable groups, the people whose voices are almost always ignored. As we saw with that map in Lombok, that means you get way more accurate and relevant information. And of course, that needs to projects that actually work. But honestly, the biggest impact is on the people themselves. They're no longer just passive recipients of aid. They become active drivers of their own change.
Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds great, but it must take a lot of time and money. And yeah, it does require a real investment up front, but here's the thing, it is so much more cost-effective in the long run. Just think about all the money wasted on projects that looked good on paper but failed because they didn't really meet the community's needs. This approach helps you avoid that, because you get it right from the very beginning.
So this leaves us with one last, really important question. The evidence is pretty clear, right? The communities hold the knowledge. The problem isn't a lack of information, it's a lack of listening. The real challenge is changing the entire mindset of the experts and the institutions. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think it's going to take for them to finally hand over the stick for good?